want to start this. I learned a lot the last 2 days. One of the things I learned, at least yesterday night, that my hotel is near a stadium in Madrid. Who is a fan of Atletico Madrid? Ah, okay, congratulations for yesterday. Yes, I have two hats as introduced. My first hat is climate engineering, and it's also quite related to facility management because we as climate engineers, we have an intrinsic and passionate motivation to create buildings with a low ecological impact. But at the same time, we realize, and I profoundly agree with what David Martinez said this morning, that an empty house is a bad house. It's good in terms of energy efficiency, but it's a waste of resources if you build a house with no quality, because then nobody will use it. So we cannot disconnect these two things. So we have to find concepts for buildings which connect energy efficiency or ecological items together with quality of space. And this has to do with the user experience, with comfort, with air quality, with hygienic air quality, with lighting and temperature. And this, what we want to do as climate engineers, we think that climate engineering, the profound understanding of thermodynamics and the local conditions together with the user requirements, can inform the design and come up with buildings which have a good connection, which create buildings which are highly comfortable and have a low impact on the environment. So we want to break with the inherited correlation between energy demand and occupants' comfort. And just as an introduction, two projects I want to show you. One is in Damascus, the French school, which is 100% passive. It has no air conditioning, and how does it work? It basically uses the cool night temperatures to cool down the classrooms, and the complete ventilation system is naturally driven by the solar chimneys, and the whole concept basically informed the architectural design, making that building low maintenance, at the same time creating an architectural icon where all the school members can be kind of part of this architectural community, and it's kind of a CI for the school. Another project from a very cold climate is the Manitoba Hydro headquarters in Winnipeg in Canada. And as my colleague came the first time to Winnipeg, it was like minus 15 degrees Celsius, and he told the cab driver, oh, it's really cold. And then the cab driver said, what do you think? This is a heat wave what we have today. Because normally we have up to minus 30 degrees Celsius, and half of the year it's below zero. But this is a building, high-tech building, high-rise for 2,000 members, workspaces in the office. But what is interesting that the whole building is basically 60% more energy efficient than code. It's the most energy efficient building in North America. But at the same time, people enjoy being there because they had to move all to this one, from different offices to this one center. And the client said, we want to create super comfortable working environment for the people. So this building is naturally ventilated even in this climate, and people enjoy their workplace. And this is the one thing. One is design, the other thing is commissioning and monitoring. This is basically simulated. So we wanted to achieve 90 kilowatt hours per square meter. And when we think about comfort and energy use, maybe we're using the wrong energy performance metrics. We use always kilowatt hours per square meter, but rather we should use kilowatt hours per person, because this is kind of the goal, to have people there, not square meters. But what you can see, it took us basically almost 2 years to come down to optimize the operation of the building by monitoring, but successfully working together with the facility management of Manitoba, bringing it down in operation to the prognosed energy performance. And at the same time, this is basically what you want to optimize from a facility management point of view. The service calls per 100 employees came down from 10 to basically 0.5 compared to existing offices. This is super good. And also to note that the sick leave rates per employee per year, 1.5 less sick days means that basically that's if you relate sick days leave together with productivity, this is an increase of productivity of 5%. And this kind of compared to or transferred to value, this is a much bigger value than the energy savings of such a building. So this is the one head. The second head, why I'm here today, is to talk about a research project, what I'm heading at the State Academy of Arts and Design in Stuttgart at Architecture School. And the title of our research project is Maximizing Space Use Intensity by Dynamic Programming. And what is this? What does this mean? I brought to you a little movie, an experiment brought up by our students to exemplify the idea behind the space sharing. Anyway, the idea was to exemplify what you can basically do on 3 by 3 by 3 meters in one room, 24 hours, bringing in different uses, starting with basically a band rehearsal, bike repair, cooking class, restaurant, basically all the services you want to bring in during a course of the day. So it starts in the evening with the bike repair shop, and then at 8 p.m. it's cooking class, everything on the 3 by 3 by 3. There's some exemption for guests. But then after the cooking class, there's the restaurant until 9. And after the restaurant, you have the bar operation after bar. What do you do after bar? In Madrid, you go to a cinema maybe. So it's cinema until late, depending on the movie. Some are already asleep, but then it's nighttime, part-time residential. And then in the morning, you get up. The first thing you do as a hipster, you do yoga to get up in the morning, and after yoga, breakfast. And then the Fab Lab, because at that day we hosted the Kickoff conference. Oh, now it's with music. Maybe we can push a little bit forward until it starts. And this experiment basically happened just before the main conference, where all these research projects were kickstarted at the State Academy of Arts. And this is a kind of a new research environment. It's called the real-world laboratories, because the Ministry of Research, they figured out that sitting in our kind of gated community of academia, this is not really effective of coming up with a social ecological transformation of our society. So they came up with the idea of this real-world laboratories, a cooperation between academia, politicians, the people outside, and economy. So this kickoff here, we just showed kind of the intention of our research project. And there are other research projects called like mobility in the city, urban transformation. And so people started to come. We offered to have a hairdresser to be ready for the conference. And after the hairdresser, basically we kickstarted with the conference here at the Academy of Arts. But the whole thing basically shows that what you can do on 3 by 3 by 3 meter volume, and how limited typically we understand space use. So why do we care about space sharing? What is the case? Why do we think about this? If you look at the global urban trend, except maybe some Eastern German cities and others, there's an upward trend of inhabitant numbers in cities. There's also a growing kind of, this is multiplied by a growing consumption of square meter per person in cities. Like 30 years ago in Stuttgart, we had 28 square meters per person. Now we had 42 square meters of person. So the demand for space is pushing and the price goes up. So there's a clear trend then also to the increase of commuters into and from the city, because a lot of people can't afford to live or work in the city. So they move out of the city and then they take the car to commute, which then in turn has a big impact on air quality and quality of the urban environment. And so you have an impact of the quality of life in cities. Of course, like the cost for space in cities, you have a big disadvantage for startups, for culture, for other activities which don't have the economic power to cope up with the increasing room cost. So it's also a big disadvantage for low-income society. Like London knows what I'm talking about. They had a big problem, like on kind of the supporting stuff in the hospitals to find place to live in London. So this is all rising. So we think that we have to tackle this. So there was also a press release about the negative impact on the economy of the rising real estate prices because workers working for Mercedes and so on, the city doesn't become more attractive because prices are so high and it's so hard to find place. It has also a big impact on startups and the startup society. So what is the solution? Densification is not always a solution for cities like Stuttgart, for example, where we have a limitation of growth. And also densification is a problem if you grow like an egg. It has a big implication also on traffic. So what we think, at the same time, we have this super underutilized space potential. If you look at your own office or your own buildings that you may be operating, and if you're true to yourself and just record the time per square meter where it's used, really in use, or empty desks, then you start to figure out that probably it's only 30% of the time when the building is really 100% used, and there's a lot of time where the rooms are basically not used. So we have the luxury of reserving the rooms for later use, but we are not actively using them. So why is this? Because there are a lot of burdens to utilize these spaces. There are legal burdens, there are access burdens, there's kind of this private expectation that this is my space even if I'm absent, and if somebody else would have the ability to use the space, then I would have to clean up, privacy things, etc. So our question is then how can we make better use of these spaces? At the same time, we have the trend of the sharing economy, whether it's private to private, lending a barbecue to your neighbor person based on social contacts, or whether it's private to private on a business platform like Airbnb, where people share their apartments with other people, or access-based consumption, mobility as a service, not as an ownership. And some people in Stuttgart, young people, they don't even have a driving license anymore. They just use a taxi, but at least they don't own a car. I myself come from the countryside. I had a car. Car was kind of a necessity and some kind of a status symbol to drive a Mercedes. But this is not the case anymore. Today it's a status symbol to have an electric, smart driving at any time, anywhere in the city. At the same time, there are new ways of working together. These co-working platforms, which is basically a business, are very, very famous. Like WeWork in the United States, or even WeLive. They come up with a new platform, WeLive, where you have this kind of co-living communities with additional facility management services. So what we think, this new interpretation of space sharing, having multiple users, one space, multiple users, parallel or serial, 24/7, has a lot of potentials because one is resource efficiency. You use the space more effectively. Everything is there. There's energy, it's heated, with water, with Wi-Fi. Nothing has to build new. Just the use of the resources are shared through many more users. And there's a social capital because then if you bring more users into one space, there's also more exchange of different users and different different knowledge groups. So also the affordability, then if you share the cost of space, then suddenly it becomes more affordable for startups and cultural events. Then also, like if you think about intensifying the use of our buildings, then of course it has also an impact on the outdoor space. Imagine like Los Angeles in the 90s, where the inner center of Los Angeles was basically a desert at night. Nobody would go there because it's empty. You only see kind of gangsters, mafia, and loneless people. But then if you bring in residential in there, the whole thing becomes more safe and you get more life on the streets. You activate basically the urban area by this measure. So we think this is a great potential for our urban environment. And our research objective is basically to initiate a sustainable use of available space in the cities, available space resources in the cities. So how do we approach this? because there are so manifold questions, we don't think that we can just sit in our corner on a desk and figure it out, because there are a lot of legal issues from city regulation, zoning regulation, also to who's responsible for the use, how to access the building, and so on. We thought we have to test it in a test lab. But first, we wanted to test this in a smaller group. The whole thing is basically a collaborative research. We have a lawyer on board, which we really need to figure out all the questions with the city and between users. We have the University of Stuttgart. We have Vermögen und Bau, hardly to translate, but they basically give us the money to rent the space. We have the facility management group of the State Collaborative University of Stuttgart. We have informatics. We have the economic support from the region of Stuttgart and the city of Stuttgart themselves to support us on our research project, which basically runs 3 years. And of course, we have the EuroFM, which we hosted in February, the winter school in Stuttgart with the theme of space sharing. So the EFM students from the winter school brought a lot of knowledge into our research project. Thank you again, EuroFM, for being our guests in February in Stuttgart. So where do we test? Different sites, different complexities. The first complexity is if you are at the art university, like the Bellas Artes in Madrid or our institution. The first thing, if you think about space sharing, is a spatial organization of different zones. And this is the Hall of Artists. This is a big hall, well lit for painters. And the first thing is analyze, is like what area is storage and what is really working area. You can make a guess. Like, so 2 colors. Blue is actually working. So there's a lot of room for improvement to make this room more accessible for more people. So based on this, our students came up with a design proposal, how to organize this better to make this space more available to more people, to be more efficient. Then the second one is kind of getting in a mezzanine. This is basically the cafeteria at our university, and this space is basically locked in after 2. Nobody can access it. But there are multiple stakeholders involved because the owner of this is not the university and so on. So we created a design charrette to come up with a solution how to disconnect this space from the rest of the cafeteria to make it accessible as a co-working space for students. So now suddenly we get more parties involved. It's like an owner of a space when the first person who rents it and then the second one who wants to rent it, and the whole thing in one airspace, which is a little bit more complicated because of path of egress and so on and security. But now we are at the point where we convert this space based on this design proposal. And then finally, we went into the urban environment and rented 160 square meter office space in the city center of Stuttgart, where we want to figure out how dense can you actually pack different users and users into 4 rooms, and what are the challenges in doing so? Like, how diverse can such a mix be, and where does it really clash and create friction? And based on that friction, we wanted to come up with solutions to address this friction and to come up with design proposals or with legal solutions or with FM solutions to support these different users in one space. So this is our space. We have basically 5 different spaces. We have an entrance area, we have a small cafeteria, a chill out area, we have sanitary rooms, we have an elevator and staircase. And this is the kind of the feeling of the room. It's an 80s build out. It's air conditioned. You have supply air here. You have exhaust air in the ceiling, and it's a 4-pipe system. You can either cool or chill, or cool or heat, or do both and destroy energy. But it's a really nice location in the building below. There's a direct connection to public transport, so it's well located. This was one of our selection criteria, that we are in the heart of the city center. So location was one of our first choices. And downstairs you have also kind of a nice place for cafeterias and clubs where people hang out. So first thing is address, to define the address, coming up with the logo on the street that people can find it, and then a spatial transformation of the space to make it a little bit more attractive than an 80s office space, to have a different feeling to it. And we're still in the process of transforming the space, and not only in terms of flexibility, but also in terms of design. And this was then in February. Our first users was the EuroFM Winter School, which addressed kind of various questions, a use concept, for example, facility management concept, and system support platform. And this was quite successful, and then we came out to the public and promoted the space and promoted the citizens of Stuttgart to actually come and use the space. And we came up with a kind of with a really low fee for using the space, because we understood that the people are kind of part of this research project, and that they also bring in their expertise and willingness to be monitored and asked, and that not everything is kind of super professional. So we brought up this this call, and like we asked, like, are you a team or association? Do you need meeting rooms? Do you want to kick off your own business? Are you a designer? Do you want to do a yoga class? Do you want to have an exhibition room? And they had also, do you want to party, and so on. And then we sent this out, distributed in the city and also online. Then the ministry called and said, you know, we are a bit concerned about the thing, do you want to party? Because we have bad experience with kind of academic rooms which are converted to party rooms. And I said, no, it's not like a big beer party and so on. It's more kind of a family cake thing at the weekend. So we're okay. And then we invited all people who are interested in a kickoff meeting, and every user basically presented himself, his idea, his requirements for the space, what he wants to do, when he wants to do, what kind of room he wants to use, so that the users also got to know each other, to settle basically the social connection between them, and to fill in the first table of the week, like when is who and where is he and what does he need. But we concentrated on 2 days because we don't want to spread out the whole week with some users. We want really to have the friction on Wednesday and Thursday to get the 24 hours full. So then we also launched a platform. We rented it, basically, Super SaaS. It's a booking platform where if you're interested to use a space in our real-world lab Spacesharing, you basically sign in, and then we ask you things like, what do you need? How often do you need it? What do you want to do? What do you need? And how often do you use it? And then this whole request comes in our platform, and then basically there's some exchange. We get a passport and legal issues sorted out with them, and then they can book the room in our space online, and they get the permission also online from our side, and then they can access the room independent from us being there. So we have various users currently. We have a music studio. This is kind of Ravi, who is have his big studio outside of Stuttgart because he couldn't afford the space in Stuttgart. But on the other hand, he says, when I want kind of musicians to come to the Black Forest, like, it's really hard. But it's easy to meet musicians in Stuttgart for the first recordings and get to know each other. So he uses the Spacesharing space as the first meeting with musicians from Stuttgart or from Berlin, which just fly into Stuttgart. And then we have, for example, Ceramics Workshop Studio, who use the space for ceramic workshops. They have the requirements that they want to have low temperature, because if you do ceramics and the temperature is too high, it doesn't work. But then you also have to have a floor which you can clean up. You have a demand for certain storage space to dry the ceramics. And then we have the sound studio, which has an impact on the sound on the use of the other of the rooms because of the noise, and also of the acoustic of the space. And yoga class, of course, has also requirements in terms of cleaning, and meeting rooms in turn has a lot of requirements in terms of furniture and equipment, beamer, etc. So what we still have to challenge is the 24-hour challenge furniture. This is an example of a desk which can be converted in a bed. We're working on this, but maybe there's an easier solution, maybe less comfortable, but maybe a hammock in the office, something like that. But we have the first request for also using that as a sleeping room, especially from architects. They work long hours. So we have an adaptive transformation of space and furniture. And one very important thing is also the transformation of the light concept according to the use. Like if you have an office, you have different light requests than if you have a movie lounge in the evening. So first we have a different lighting concept, different elements, LED lighting equipped. And in addition to that, we brought in kind of battery-driven LED lighting, which you just can take at the entrance, and then you bring it to your desk or to the room, and then you can create your own lighting scenario depending on the use of the room. So we try to get a feedback from the users to transform these spaces to a higher degree of flexibility. So we think this is what we want to achieve at the end of this research project. Kind of a summary of what we have done, a space sharing, do-it-yourself book, and maybe a platform where everybody can offer a room, and where we combine people who offer and who search room in the urban environment. And we think that I think that this ad from the Tokyo Water Park, where it says, "Welcome to breathtaking Tokyo Water Park," where you can wash away the pressure and stress of the overcrowded city and relax with your friends, might be a little bit awkward to that picture, but we think if the invitation is right, if the built environment is right, that people will take the invitation and they see the benefits of sharing spaces and that people will share. So sharing and caring is well connected, and I think it's a huge opportunity, and it's highly connected to what you're doing in the facility management. Thank you very much.